So the counteroffensive is going more slowly than we like, and David Petraeus is going to answer the question of why. But before we do, I'm going to set the table with a number of small little articles and pictures that will help you understand where we are. All right, hello friends, my name is Darren Gertis, and I'm just a professor that tries to give you context to help you understand what's going on in the war in Ukraine. I stumbled over this tweet as I was doing some of the research about it, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive at the moment. We do this and it mocking like JFK, not because it is easy, but because we thought it would be easy. And I thought, what unmitigated gall. This coming from someone who is on the 24th, almost the 25th, 3-week special military operation. Right? You thought this was going to be wrapped up in 3 weeks. And 24 cycles later, we're still here. 25 in just a few days. And but now, while they're saying that and mocking it, they're kind of telling a little bit of truth that we thought it would be easier than this. It's hard. It's very hard. And I showed you a video about the counteroffensive of why it's going so slow a few weeks ago. And I want to follow up on that and just talk about like some of the difficulties. And I'm going to highlight David Petraeus here in one of the videos. Something else on Twitter that I wanted to show you and just look at the wreckage around, like the military hardware, the destruction that this guy is showing. I'm not putting any of the sound in the video. It's just music. But like, yeah, this has not been an easy thing, like they're just walking through the park. No. This is very, very difficult. Okay, so with that being said, and let's look at RT and talk about the failed counteroffensive. And the reason that I'm looking at a search for failed counteroffensive, and you'll see 178 results, is because every time the messaging that I'm hearing on RT, and I spend a lot of my time looking at RT and TASS and Pravda and things like that, is that they keep talking about, well, and the reason that they're sending drones into Moscow is because the counteroffensive has failed, the failed counteroffensive, and they will talk about it like that. Here's just failed counteroffensive, no hyphen, 178 results. Here it is with a hyphen here, and it's 219 results. Now, not all of these are just from the date of the counteroffensive. If you're playing at home, by the way, that's 397 results. But again, the counteroffensive only started on June 8th. This goes well before that. They liked the term and they were just recycling it. So that would only leave the last 56 days. But there's probably a good 100 or so uses of that just on RT. In the last, and I'm talking about because they'll use it multiple times in each video, a good 100 or so within that 56 days. They love talking about the failed counteroffensive. Okay, here's here's CNN, and here's David Petraeus identifying key factors in the Ukrainian
says Russia
counteroffensive.
may be forced to use a nuclear weapon if Ukraine's counteroffensive operation is successful. His comments come after a drone hit a Russian shopping center in Moscow overnight. We've got some video.
Okay, that's just Medvedev saber rattling like he always does, trying to deter the West. Now, if you didn't actually want to deter the West, if you weren't really worried about them, you wouldn't be saber rattling like that. So that's how you interpret what's going on there.
Attack. You can see an explosion of Moscow there. No word if anyone was injured in that attack. Just yesterday, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the war is gradually returning to Russia's territory. We should say they did not claim direct responsibility for that drone attack in Moscow. I'm joined now by former CIA Director and CENTCOM Commander, General David Petraeus. General, I'll get back to the nuclear threat in just a moment. But first, these drone attacks that are taking place on Russian soil, the Ukrainians don't claim responsibility for all of them. But what's the strategic gain, if any, that the Ukrainians get from this?
John, I think that the objective here is to, again, bring the war to the Russian people, particularly.
And that's exactly right. Listen, I mean, there's only a small fraction of the people that are actually paying attention in Russia. And that's because they've had the luxury of not paying attention. And Putin likes it that way. He likes them depoliticized. But that's a double-edged sword. Because they've been depoliticized, now he's got to try to raise the temperature to get them into the military. And he's doing things to take those kind of measures as well.
Those in Moscow These are presumably Ukrainian-produced drones. They are targeting, according to individuals with whom I spoke, in fact, 7 weeks ago in Kyiv, legitimate military targets, although they don't always end up hitting those, of course, because the air defense can deflect them. But I think these, similar to those Russian ethnic forces that were operating from Ukraine into Russia, the Legion and so forth, what they're trying to do is, again, to acquaint the Russian people with the fact that a war is going on, that it can have an impact on them. Ideally, that it's not going well for the Russians on the battlefield on Ukraine, and also to distract them to a degree, to require them to use assets to protect their own soil, their own ministries of defense, and so forth, that can't be used, therefore, on the battlefield in Ukraine.
General, what's your assessment of how the counteroffensive is going in general? At the end of last week, the Ukrainians were claiming success on the southern front. Staromayorsk is a town, a small city that they retook, which was Russian custody or Russian hands for more than a year. What more do you think the Ukrainians need to be doing along this front?
And that's one of the few significant successes that they've had on the battlefield. Let's not fool ourselves and try to explain things away and say that, oh, they're doing a really good job and the Russians are just lying about it. No, it's really slow going. It's really hard to get through these battle lines because they don't have the proper tools. I gave the example the other day of like when I'm working on the stairs in my own home, like if I didn't have the right tool, the thing that you hit your knee against the rug to push the rug over, like it would be really hard to do it. That's kind of what the Ukrainians are doing on the battlefield. They really need more weapons, particularly air power, that they don't have, that the Americans would never try to take land like this in the modern age without.
I think they need to be doing what they actually are now doing, having adapted their plan. Of course, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And it was quickly clear that these miles-long minefields, anti-personnel, anti-tank minefields, tank ditches, dragon's teeth, trench lines full of Russian soldiers, all overwatched by forward observers and drones with artillery on call, that these are going to be very, very difficult to breach, given the shortcomings that the Ukrainians have in certain assets that we would have deployed in this kind of situation. In particular, massive air power. We would have just carpet bombed the whole area of these minefields, tried to blow up as much as we possibly could, and then very substantial, heavily armed, essentially bulldozers, D9 bulldozers that just plow their way through this, supported again by close air support, attack helicopters, and the rest. They don't have that. So they've adapted, I think, impressively. Now, their achievements have been pretty modest. They've certainly cleared, liberated over 100 square miles. That's not much, although it is more in the first 7 weeks of this offensive than the Russians achieved in the previous 7 months of their fall and winter offensive.
Okay, so when you put that in perspective, yeah, I get that, but we're expecting more, and Western partners are expecting more. So it's been painful to watch because it is so slow. But if you don't have the air power, and I talked about this, the lesson of World War I. This video, it was only like 3 minutes long, but very few people watched it because it's called The Lesson of World War I. It's an important lesson, and he just talked about it, and if you don't understand that, there's a reason why they're going so slowly. Okay.
But what they're doing now, I think, is described well by the Chief of Defense Staff of the UK, who has described this as starve, stretch, and strike. So the starve, you attrit the Russian headquarters, their artillery units, their reserve force that are waiting to be deployed, their ammo and fuel storage locations, and the lines of communication from Crimea to Russia and Crimea to Ukraine. You do this all across the front, across a 600-mile front. By the way, that's 150 miles more than the distance from Kuwait to Baghdad for that invasion. And you stretch those forces. You keep Russians deployed everywhere. And then once you've set the conditions by this attrition, once you've picked your way through the minefields with sappers, engineers, and so forth, and you have an opportunity, you then press forward with these tanks and infantry fighting vehicles provided by the West. But again, they're not going to be able to really bring to bear the combined arms operations capabilities that they now do have until they can get a breakthrough and force the Russians to start to move to respond to them when they can break out into the open. And it's very hard to say when that might be. Indeed, I think one of the critical elements in what will determine the success of this offensive, which will be a fall as well as summer offensive for Ukraine, they have to achieve significant progress, and they know.
And so that's part of the problem. They're on the clock, right? There's not. It's kind of like baseball where there's no forced strike. Like there's no. It's not like that where they can wait there and wait their turn, but at a certain point they're going to get a forced out. Okay, so they don't have to swing at anything, but they have to swing before a certain time, and the winter is coming and they know it, and they don't have necessarily the right tools to be able to accomplish it. That's what's making this so freaking miserable.
I think the key is going to be whether Russian forces can hold up. They've been in the line for over a year. They're not rotating forces the way the Ukrainians are. They're not that well looked after. And will they crack? Might they crumble? Might it be more than just local? That, I think, is going to be a very important factor in whether the Ukrainian offensive achieves the success that many of us are hoping that they will achieve.
Okay, so, and that's all true, but you have mines that are 2 meters apart for long swaths of patches of ground, right, that they have to cross through. We have Dragon's Teeth, and we have mines, and we have trenches, then we have artillery. They have to break through all that, and it's very, very difficult. Okay, let's look at, and by the way, General Surovikin, who was put in custody after the rebellion or mutiny or freedom march or whatever, he's the guy that withdrew from Kherson, gave Russia what looked like a black eye, but he's probably most responsible for this. So from the Russian perspective, he did the most for Russia of pretty much anyone. Okay, anyway, let's keep going and look through this. So here's an article in The Guardian. The first casualty of the Ukrainian counteroffensive was wishful thinking. That's right. We thought that it was going to go a whole lot faster than it did. Tanks, as the military experts had warned, were not a solution on their own. Without air superiority and the skies above and the overwhelming artillery support, they were vulnerable to Russian anti-tank missiles fired from the trenches and from gunships able to strike them from over the horizon. The Ukrainians had mine-clearing vehicles, but not enough. They were priority targets for the Russian, who learned to stack anti-tank mines on top of each other to hobble them. So that's what's been happening here. And again, I urge you to watch the lesson of World War I, because that's what's at play here. This is what the battlefield looks like. There's basically 3 large pushing sections, and let me move on a little bit now. There's also here's another perspective of it. Here's another perspective of it. And if you watch the map, you'll see the map changing a little bit as they're moving, but they're not making as much progress as you would like them to be seeing, right? So it is going slowly. You don't want to buy Russian propaganda that's saying that more tanks were destroyed than they actually have. Battlestar Galactica and whatever else, and obvious lies. But it is slow going, okay? And there's a reasons why it's slow going. Here, if you want to feel why it's slow going, I want you to watch this video. Imagine you're in the front lines and shell just came in.
Я намагаюся, я копаю. Чекай, дай розкопаю. Все нормально, живи. Можеш рухатись.
Придавила ще одну руку.
Пацани, розкапуйте зі свого боку.
А ти быстрее, блядь, відкапуй, або дай я шальмой. Виходь!
Серега, все нормально, сейчас вытащим.
Да не спеши, я себя нормально чувствую. Вроде бы. Братан, давай, руку шевелить. Давай, братан. Руку тяни. Скажи, пускай поможет нам, блядь.
Пошел.
Все, вперед, туда пішли, блядь.
If you're still complaining about it's too slow, you're not there, right? Imagine what that must have been like, how harrowing that must be like. Okay, I think that the Ukrainians are going to win. Of right, they should win. If there's any justice in the world, they will win. But it's going to be a long, hard slog. Okay, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this and processing this with me. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.